so it's time for winter and the fall, so there's things to do so that when things start in the spring, you go and running. That's best conditions possible. You won't get caught surprised. You won't get surprised when the season starts. So let's just begin with this. I've got a couple more late comers here. A good thing I'm going to send you to see the principle of this continues. Very good. Let's go. So, these are the four main issues we'll be looking at tonight. So, looking at winter loss. Winter is a time where there's a higher risk of losing your hive. So, how do you ensure that risk is minimized? We'll look at insulation wrapping. There's always a lot of talk about that amongst beekeepers and new beekeepers, old beekeepers, and cleaning, of course, and learning. So let's just start this class. Okay. Okay, let's talk about winter loss. Winter is a hard season, you know, and every year, if you're a member of the Ontario Beekeepers Association, or probably any other beekeepers association across different provinces, you'll receive a survey, a voluntary survey, where they'll ask you, the percentage of hives you've lost during the winter and the reasons why you think you lost those hives. And what I'm presenting to you here is a graph by StatsCan on such a percentage of colony losses over the winter over a 13-year period across Canada. Now, you see they range from a low of 15% to a high of 35%. So 35%, that means if you had 10 hives, you've lost 3 or 4 of them, right? That is a huge loss. To lose 3 or 4 hives in a 10 hive operation is a huge loss, because that means you want to replace them in the spring, and when you start hives from scratch in the spring, they'll never be as productive compared to hives that have survived the winter well. And it costs a bit of money and time to replace those hives. So you want to reduce those winter losses. I find these numbers kind of high, but I suppose Stats Canada, perhaps they reflect different kinds of beekeeping. If you're a massive commercial beekeeper, perhaps you've got hundreds, perhaps thousands of hives, and you're not taking care of them. You can't afford to spend so much time preparing them for winter as you would if you're just a hobby beekeeper and you're looking at a few hives. I don't know. I've had, a knock on wood, a very good overwintering success with my hives. I haven't lost one hive since I started again beekeeping 4 years ago. So assuming I'm overwintering about 4 or 5 hives a winter, so that's 16 to 20 hives I've overwintered without losing one. So I'm very proud of my record. I don't know if that's just luck or that I'm such a great overwintering expert, but I'll take what I can get. So as I was saying, in that survey that you get, they'll ask you why you think what caused your overwintering loss. And you'll see below in this graph, there's various reasons. So starvation, or poor queens, weather, varroa, nosema. We talked about nosema, weak colonies, or other, or don't know. So there's some categories there that are pretty vague. You have the darker red, the dark kind of brown reddish color that represents the commercial versus the hobby. And while there are some minor differences, perhaps in terms of the queen quality or don't know, it seems like the hobby keepers don't know as much as the commercial beekeepers. They generally follow the same trend. I'm a bit of a critic of this annual survey, and I've written to the Ontario Beekeepers Association because they do send a survey out, and I don't think it's a scientific survey because they don't know who's answering the survey. It could be just the people who lost hives or who are complaining, and they want to raise, they hope to get government assistance to pay for their hive renewals. So they'll complain about lost hives. They may exaggerate it. We don't know. We don't know who answers these surveys. So it's not a scientific survey. I don't like it, but that's what they're doing right now. Still, it gives you an idea of the kinds of reasons the Beekeeping Association would associate with losing hives. And we're going to go over these different reasons and address what you need to be doing to try to avoid losing your hives for these particular reasons. So we'll look at starvation. So going into the winter with insufficient stores. So your supers, your brood boxes, I should say, the ones that go into the winter and we spoke about this last time, you want to make sure they're as full of honey as possible when you close them up at the end of September, beginning of October. So we talked about after you've extracted the honey, you've extracted the honey supers, you'll put feeders of sugar syrup so that the bees can take that in and fill every available cell that's still empty in the brood chambers down below, so that they go into the winter packed. If they go into the winter full of honey, they should have no problems surviving. Because don't forget, between the time when the bees take their last nectar and pollen, could be mid-September, maybe even early October, to when the first nectar and pollen becomes available, depending where you live, early May, they have to survive completely on what they have stored. They're in this box. What's that? September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, over 7 months. That's more than half a year. They got to basically make do with what they have inside their hive. So, make sure that they don't starve, and make sure you do what you can so that those brood boxes are full of honey. So people have, there's a lot of studies about all these things, and some people put their hives on scales so they can keep track of their weight. And generally speaking, the hive will lose about half a kilo of weight. Half a kilo a week disappears in the weight of a hive over the winter, and that goes up to a kilo a week getting into March as things start to warm up and the queen starts to lay eggs. So that boils down to about a loss of 16 kilos of honey over the winter. So then you have to, as long as you have at least 16 kilos of pure honey in there, I'm not talking about the weight of the equipment or the bees, but just the pure honey, then you should be able to pass the winter. But it's better to have more, of course. So what does starvation look like? Well, the thing about winter and for beekeepers, there's nothing you could do. There's no use going to look at your hives in the winter. There's nothing you could do. If you open them up and you see they have no honey, well, you can't feed them honey in the winter. You're going to have to open up the hive. You're going to totally disturb them, and it's too late by then. So usually you find out that your hives have starved in the spring when you first go to them. It's a nice day and you look at your hive and you're expecting to see bees flying around, and there are none. And that is a big, disappointing thing for beekeepers. So you open up your hives, and whereas this hive on the left, this still has live bees, you look, there's no honey there, right? So in this hive on the right, this frame, you see, what can you see there? It's just the rear ends, the derrieres of all the bees sticking out of the cells. These bees are all dead, and that's typically what you see in a hive that is starved. The bees go in there. I don't know what they're looking for. They're looking for the last drop of honey, or they're cold. They're looking for heat. They go in there and they die. So and often as well, it may be moldy because they've died a couple months before, and there's humidity in the hive, so it's a mess, and it's a sad thing to see. Yeah, so the signs of starvation, your hives are empty, and they're empty or nearly empty of honey. There could be honey still in the hive, but it could be very cold winter. And let's say in March, there's still honey in the hive in the corners, but March was a very cold March, and they haven't been able to come out of the cluster. We spoke about a cluster last week. They need some warmer days, or 0 degrees, or where the inside of the hive can maybe go up to 5 or 6, and they can walk around a bit and find that extra bit of honey in the corners. But if it stays cold, they may not be able to find that honey. So how do I know if they've stored enough honey before going to winter? Well, there's a couple of approaches, and one of I do is I just eyeball it. I do an inspection after the last harvest, and then check to see if the combs are full of capped honey, or are there a lot of empty combs, or just partially filled combs. Or some people, the people who want to be technical about it, will weigh their colonies. So you could have, I was at the Canadian Tire just last week, and I saw exactly, well, not exactly this model, but this particular thing is called a baggage meter. Weigh your baggage. It's a hook, but it's perfect. It's not that expensive, $15 or $20, and you could use one of those to weigh your hives. You put a string around one end, and you lift it to 45-degree angle, and that should be about half of the weight by geometry. And then if you lift the other side, you get the half of the weight again. You can average it out to see what you get. So a double brood box hive should weigh at least 45 kilos, and a single 32 kilos. That's the weight with the equipment. or you can estimate it by tipping the hives. You can just lift it and get an idea. So over the years, you know, you kind of figure this out if it feels heavy enough. Never look for fat bees. That's a beginner mistake. You know, are my bees fat? Oh, they're all fat. They should be okay. No, whereas bees might store a tiny bit of fatty tissue in their bodies, they will, but not so much that they will look like this. So what do you feed your bees? I guess we didn't talk about this last time. This is the time we talk about this. All right, yes. So what do you feed your bees? Well, first of all, before even talking about feeding bees, make sure you're not taking the honey out of the brood boxes during the last harvest. They need it more than you do. There's a temptation, you know, you're a beekeeper, you look at your honey super, you know, you started with a nuke in mid-June and their population grew, but they weren't able, you know, they had to make wax. They just started filling with honey, and in September, you look at your honey super, and there's not that much honey, and you look inside the brood box, oh my God, there's a beautiful frame full of honey. You just want to take one frame so that at least you can have some good honey for the winter. That's a no-no. If you steal their honey from the brood chamber in September, they won't be able to, it's going to be very difficult for them to replace that. So leave it there. Beyond that, it's good to know that adult bees require very little beyond carbohydrates to survive. You know, they're adults, they don't need too much protein, they don't need too many vitamins, they're adults. And as long as they get their carbs, which is a source of energy, they should be okay. And honey is almost a pure carbohydrate. You know, it's got some water in it, of course. We talked about the moisture content of honey. It also has a trace amount of elements. So honey is a very good food for bees. But at the end of the day, you know, you don't want to give them the honey and the super back to them. You want to have a bit of a surplus for yourself. So what you do is you feed them concentrated solution of water, of sugar water. That allows them to take it in and transform it into sugar honey and complete the winter stores. So that's perfectly fine. And a lot of expert beekeepers say that sugar water, it's better to feed sugar water to bees in the fall than to feed honey back to them. Why? Because honey, depending on the kind of honey, may have, you know, trace elements that, you know, are fine for bees normally, but if they have to eat that all winter long, it will tend to give them dysentery, diarrhea, especially if they can't fly out of their hives to evacuate their bowels. So they say it's better to, sugar water is perfect, it's pure, sugar and water, nothing else, there's no various other elements in there. So do not feed the bees before you have harvested the last of your honey. You know, if you've got your honey supers there and then you put sugar water on top, well, the bees are going to take that sugar water and they're going to turn it into sugar honey and put it into your honey supers. And so when you're extracting your honey from your honey supers, you're going to have not nectar honey, but sugar water honey, which, you know, it's probably not so bad. It's perfectly fine to eat, but, you know, it's not what you're looking for, is it? You want real nectar honey. I mean, you can do that if you want, but just don't go around telling people when you're giving them the honey or selling it that this is perfect, this is pure honey. You can't do that. So feeding, you just mix sugar, as much sugar as you can in water. And again, on the Facebook pages, there's always a lot of confusion, you know, 1-to-1, 2-to-1. And I say, well, 1-to-1, what volume or weight, what temperature? Because, you know, the hotter the water, the more sugar you can dissolve in that. I took chemistry and biology at university. I learned these things. So, you know, if you look it up, in 1 liter of water at 15 degrees Celsius, you can dissolve 2 kilograms of sugar. That is an amazing amount, really, frankly. You know, a big bag of sugar in 1 liter of water, it dissolves. And I'm always impressed to see how sugar dissolves so easily into water. Of course, you don't want to dissolve the maximum amount of sugar at 90 degrees water or very hot water, because as it cools down, if you've maxed out at 90, as it cools down, the water can't hold it all, and a lot of sugar will come out of solution. So having said that, it's a lot easier to dissolve your sugar in hot water. So I usually just basically fill a big blue, kind of like a 20-liter tank of warm water, and I put, you know, maybe 5 bags of sugar in there, as much, you know, and 10 kilos, and that usually does it. So once you've got that sugar solution, what do? There's different ways of feeding it to the bees, and each way has its own little advantage, of course, and disadvantage. So we'll go over that. This is a frame feeder. So what you do is you take out one of the frames in your hive and you put this kind of like sleeve in there that with this like, which could hold the liquid. So you put it in there, you fill it up with sugar water, and you put this kind of contraption in there. It allows the bees to go inside. There's kind of a grill there so that they can't actually get into the water, but they can walk down and walk up without drowning and take some sugar water. You see that pretty commonly. There's some advantage to that. It's you put it inside the hive, so it stays, relatively warm and accessible only to the bees in that hive at all times. The other bees around can't get to that, so you're feeding only that hive. It's a disadvantage is it's quite small, so there's only a limited amount of syrup. You may need to replenish it every day or two. The bees can somehow, when the conditions are right, they're going to take that up very quickly. And you also have to open up the hive to replenish it, and that bothers the bees. As we said before, try to minimize the amount of time you're getting into your hives, and your bees will be thankful for that. And also it takes space normally dedicated to a frame of comb. So I suppose what you can do is take a comb out that's already full of honey, and you can store it while you're doing this. And once the bees have taken up all the sugar water and they stop taking it up, then you can put the honeycomb back in. Well, here's a hive top feeder. That's what I use. I'm not saying I'm using the best thing. It's the best way to go. It's what I started with when I started beekeeping, and I like it. I think it works. I tried, some people that use a cheap way, they use a Ziploc bag and you fill it with syrup. And if you just slice it a little bit, a couple of slices down the plastic and flip it over, it'll start leaking and the bees will take that up. That's another way of doing that. But a Ziploc bag is only carries so much sugar water. And so you, again, have to go in every day to replenish it. If you like doing that, that's fine. A hive top feeder works in the following principle. You have this is your inner cover, but your deep inner cover. It's not just a piece of wood, but it's a piece of wood with sides. And this one here, as an aside, this is not important for what I'm saying now, but my inner covers have holes in them with screens. And I like that because it's aeration. In the summer, I usually have a screen in this hole. When it's hot, the air circulates, the nectar can dry up more quickly. I like that. But anyway, that was an aside. What matters here is if you have a deep inner cover like this with a hole down the middle, you can put the hive top feeder right into it. There's a hole here into it, and the hole goes right down through here. So the bees can come up from the hive through this hole up here, and then you put this type of plastic cap over the hole, allowing just a bit of space for the bees to come in and lap the water and come back down and store it in the hive. And this carries a lot more sugar syrup than that frame feeder. So what are the advantages on this one? It's also inside the hive, although it's on top, not quite inside. It can hold up to 5 liters of sugar syrup. So that's equivalent of 10 kilograms of sugar. That's quite a lot, right? So when you want to raise the weight of your hives quickly, well, that's a lot. If the bees take 2 of these full of sugar syrup, that's a lot. This should be okay for the winter. You can replenish the syrup without opening the hive and disturbing the bees. And it targets, again, like the frame feeder, that specific hive. If you've got 5 hives and only one is very weak, it doesn't have much honey, then you don't have to feed the other 4. You don't have to feed them as much. Then you can just use this to feed that hive. Because it costs, people look at the numbers and they'll say, well, I got to buy sugar, and if I got a lot of hives, they're looking at the numbers, it's an issue. But, on top of the hive, it can get cold. And if it's cold, a very cold day, the bees won't go up there and get the syrup. So that's why it's important also not to wait until October to feed your bees. Take your honey off, 10th of September. After that, there's not much going on anymore. And then feed them right away. Right away, start feeding them. And that way, they're gonna have maximum amount of chances of still nice weather, and they can take as much syrup as they can. And you keep on feeding them until they stop taking it. You'll notice one day, hey, they're not taking my syrup anymore. I was filling this thing, I filled it, and I came 3 days later, it was empty. I filled it again, 3 days later, it was empty. I filled it again, oh, it's not empty anymore. They don't take it. It's because it's finished. They can't take anymore. And there are these are external barrel feeders. You basically put a barrel, a bucket if you want, upside down, and maybe on a lid, and the sugar water will seep through. And as the bees take it up, the inside pressure forms a bit of vacuum, and bubbles come back inside, and then more sugar comes out. And this is also a popular way of feeding bees. it can hold huge amounts of syrup. If you have you can do this with huge barrels, or there's different versions of doing this. You can have a huge open barrel, but with things floating on the surface. That way the bees can just alight on the floating hay or whatever and get the syrup and fly away. You might want to put a bit of a roof over it in case it rains. It feeds all the bees of your bee yard in one go. So you just put one of these out there and all the bees will go to it. You don't have to go to each hive. And if you put a lot of sugar syrup, then you just have to go once a week. And it's great, especially if you have large numbers of colonies. If you have 100 colonies or 50 colonies, and instead of going to each one and opening up and putting a hive top feeder, it gets expensive in equipment as well, 50 hive top feeders. You put one or two of these big buckets and you're all ready. But you're also feeding your neighbors' bees along with wasps and other insects. So, you never know who actually is coming to these things to eat your sugar syrup. And of course, if it's raining or cold, the bees can't get to it. So that was feeding bees. Are there any questions about feeding bees, starvation and things like that? Are we good?
Oh,
all right. Yes, Natalie.
Yeah, I was wondering, so when would you, so you've got this kind of liquid syrup, that's only for the fall and after. And so when you use the fondant, is that that's the spring version?
Yeah. You don't use liquid syrup only in the fall. You could use it in the spring as well, and I do use it in the spring. The fondant, we spoke about it the other day. It's like toothpaste consistency or plasticine of sugar, right? You feed that because when you feed it sugar syrup, they can turn that into honey and store it in the cells, right? So you feed that to them when it's warm enough, they can get to it and they can evaporate it inside the hive. There's a circulation of air going on. But if it's still cold out, if it's the end of March, there's snow on the ground, and they won't be able to take up any sugar syrup and evaporate it, turn it into honey. So that's why you don't want to get into the hives either when it's that kind of temperature. You don't want to be opening up hives and taking out frames, feeding them, with the frame feeders. That's going to disturb them. Not worth it. Same thing. If it gets to be, at the end of March, it could be -5 at night. Just -2 in the day. You can put a hive top feeder, they won't go for it. But if you put a fondant above the frames below the inner cover, there's still warmth in there, so they can go and eat that stuff. They can't store it though. They don't store fondant, they just eat it. It's like honey, like they'll just eat it. So that's basically what you do when it's cold. The conditions are not good for them to cure honey, cure the sugar syrup. Okay, so we're going to continue with other hives causes of winter loss. I'm going to combine some of the reasons that were highlighted in those graphs we saw at the beginning. So going into winter in poor health or low numbers, you've got a poor queen, you've got diseases, they're weak, they could be weak for different reasons. So what do you do? How do you handle that? If well, first of all, you don't want to get there in September. You want to avoid that in September. You should not arrive in September and realize your queen is poor, you've got mite infections, or they got nosema, or your hives are weak. So ensure your colony goes into the winter in good numbers and in full health. Of course, that requires a constant monitoring, regular monitoring over the summer. And if you see they're, treating for Varroa, and I suppose there's one thing you could do if they're weak. Sometimes you might have a swarm, and the hive has not been a strong hive. You'll have that, dud hives. They just don't perform that well. So you can also combine hives. So if you have you're in September, it's September, even the end of August, and you're looking at a hive, this hive, it's not going to survive the winter. There should be like 50,000 bees in there. If there are 10,000, I'll be happy. That's not going to work. But 10,000 bees is good. You don't want to lose them. So you can take that hive and put it on top of another hive. And there's different ways of doing that. I'm not going to go through those details right now. You just look online and look for combining hives, and there's several ways of doing it. But quickly, what you can do is you take the inner cover off a strong hive, you put a piece of newspaper, and you put the weak hive on top of that. And you just do 1 or 2 little slits in that newspaper to let a bit of air flow, but the bees can't really get through. So what they're going to do is over the day or two, they're going to get a sense that there's something going on up and above and down below, and they're going to start chewing at the paper. And they're going to get used to the scent and to each other without, you know, a massive, rapid introduction of two different colonies. And usually they'll work together and they'll combine that way. If there's the queens will battle it out and take care of each other, and you should have a stronger hive. But, you know, if you're interested in that, when the time comes, look online, you know, how to combine hives, and make sure you're looking at credible or reputable sources of information on how to do it. So how do you make sure your hives are healthy? Well, I think you should be able to answer that question by now. You know, throughout the summer and early fall, monitor for diseases and treat appropriately in a timely fashion. Monitor your queen's performance. Is she a good layer? Got lots of brood over the spring, summer, and early fall. And if not, replace her. If you can give your queen a chance. She's a new queen, and at the beginning there's nothing going on, but give her a week, 10 days, and check again. If you see there's still nothing going on, you see the queen, you'll see some eggs, but not many. That's when you might want to say, listen, I'm going to buy a new queen and you know, evict this one. Then monitor your hive populations. As I said, light swarms can reduce population to low levels. In that case, you can also move frames from strong hives, frames of brood and bees, take them out and put them in the weak hive. You know, as long as you know, the weak hive is weak for a valid reason, not because it's sick, it's a poor queen, but you know, they've just swarmed or something like that. And again, I said it before, it's good to have 2 hives, good to have 3 hives. I think 3 hives is a good number. 2 is better than 1. And 3, I think, is once you've got the hang of it, go for 3 and we'll stay with 3 unless you want to go more. With 3, it allows you to be versatile and to, you know, to combine hives or put some frames from one hive to another. If you're missing a queen in one hive for some reason, you can see the other hive is about to swarm. It's got a bunch of swarm cells where you take that off and you put it in the hive without the queen or with a weak queen, and they're going to take care of everything there. So you can do that kind of thing. So another issue of winter loss is poor weather. Poor weather. I mean, winter, who says winter is good weather? Since when is winter ever good weather? It's always poor weather in winter, right? It's cold, it could be rainy, ice storms, and all these things make it hard for bees. Honeybees are not meant to be living around this part of the world, I don't think. You know, they can take winter and winter climates, but it gets pretty rigorous around here, so it's tough for them. I think when people say poor weather, it could be they don't know and whatever. It's just maybe I wasn't ready. So again, we are having our long cold winters with no warm spells. So you know, it's important. I guess in the slide, I have to reorganize the slide because I showed you the pictures before giving you the intro here. But during a winter, you'd hope that you have the occasional days where it's exceptionally warm. It might be up to 7 or 8 degrees. You do get that, right? And then February, March sometimes. And when that happens, you'll go to your hives. You'll see the bees are flying around, and they can evacuate what's in their bowels. You know, so that's good for them. You'll see brown stains all over their hive, and that's good. But if the winter's cold, they can never do that. That's an issue, and they get stuck inside, and they get dysentery. Well, so anyway, despite all that, what can you do as a beekeeper? Well, you have to understand, I guess it's good to understand how the beehive, the colony behaves in the winter. That way it allows you to, better implement management practices. So recently on my Facebook page, I put 4 or 5 pictures, slides explaining what do bees do in the winter, and some of these pictures are from that. So picture number 1, you have a beekeeper who's opened up a hive, and you see all the bees are clustered together in a circular pattern. We call this the cluster, the winter cluster, and that's what they do in the winter. When it's cold, they come together and tightly in a ball. The bees will eat a bit of honey, they get their energy, and they will vibrate their wing muscles, just as we shiver sometimes when we're cold, to generate heat. And if you have 30 or 40,000 bees doing that at the same time, it generates a lot of heat. If you open up your hive in October, November, you look at the inner cover where there's a hole, and you put I like to do that. I put my nose down there, and I feel heat coming up, and the nice perfume, the fragrance of the hive. There is certainly heat coming out of there. And that's what they do. That's how they keep warm. And this picture on the side shows you a little bit a graphic representation of the temperature gradient. From outside, here they're saying the ambient temperature is -11 outside. And so inside the hive, they've got the isotherms here, -7 around here. There's no bees, but it's still -7. The radiation of the cluster, the heat radiation, goes all the way down here, -7. That's +7 as you get closer to the bees. And here's the cluster perimeter, this dotted line. So here's where you have the bees. So right inside the cluster perimeter, it's 15 degrees and soon 24. In the heart of it, it's 33 degrees. 33 degrees, that's a hot temperature, you know. So all through winter, it could be -30 outside. Inside the cluster, in the heart of the cluster, it's 33 degrees or in that range. And that's where they will, if the queen might still be laying a few eggs, or, you know, especially towards the end of winter, that's where they'll lay the eggs. They'll keep all that warm so you can have new bees. That's how it works. So, so if you, in order to protect, to try to offset the bad weather, the harsh winters we have, you have to make sure your bees will not be exposed to the worst parts of that winter. So you have to mitigate those things by preparing the hives. How? Well, you can insulate them. And I have a picture here of insulation. And I like to say that insulation is not about the actual material, no, it's how well that material traps air, because air is an excellent insulator. Still air, that's why we have double glazed windows. If that air is still the half a centimeter between the two panes of glasses has a high R value if the air remains still. So the key considerations here is, I'm ahead of myself, still air is the best insulation. A hive with no wayward drafts is key. You want to make sure there's no drafts in your hive. If the bees can be in there, and there's no, like, you know, you get a north wind blowing and there's wind coming in there or whatever's cracks, that's going to disturb them a lot, and that's going to really reduce their chances of surviving winter. So what are the key considerations? You have to protect them from heat-robbing winds. And here in this case, in this picture, we have the beekeeper put in a windbreak, which is a great idea, put a windbreak. It could be a man-made or whatever, woman-made windbreak, or you can just put your hives next to a thick bush, you know, as long as the wind is attenuated. I don't like this hive setup, by the way. They're too close to each other. Very hard to get into that second hive. But anyway, it's an aside. Also, you have to look at moisture evacuation. The bees, like all living organisms, they release water vapor when metabolizing, when they're burning sugar into energy. They release CO2 and water, right? When we exhale, we release humidity. Where does that go? What happens to it? When it's cooled down, of course. That's why I have this picture here. I was trying to find pictures of condensation. That's what I came up with. It condenses into water. And in a hive, you got that hot, warm air. Where does it go? It moves up towards the ceiling. And the ceiling, you know, even if you got insulation up there, it can be cold, so it'll condense up there. And if it's quite cold, it'll turn into ice. But what happens on a warmer day? That ice melts and it rains. It rains inside the hive. You know, you want to kill a hive in the winter? Just water it, you know, and it's going to kill your hive. So you want to somehow evacuate that moisture. How do you do that? Well, everybody, this is another big discussion among hobby beekeepers, how best to evacuate your moisture. Well, this is what I do. These are my hives here. I think a lot of beekeepers will just be satisfied with an upper opening, you know, and a lower entrance down below for moisture, for winter air circulation. And I don't think that's enough, because that means that you're counting on air coming here and somehow going through the entire hive and coming out here again, right in front of the hive. Perhaps if you got a hole in the back, it might be make more sense. I think you end up having a lot of moisture coming up on your ceiling and not getting evacuated. Whoops, what's going on here? Whoops. So I like to use my deep inner cover with the hole in the middle with the screen. And I put in, yeah, and I've got little holes around it, more or less useful. The screen, and I put this piece of rigid insulation in there, rigid insulation, a good chunk. It's probably 5 centimeters thick. I don't know what R value that would be, like R10 maybe, or more, 15. And then I've got, here we got pine needles, but I usually stick a piece of cloth in there so the air doesn't move freely. It can't just blow in and out. It has to, it stopped, the air circulation is much slowed down by the cloth or the pine needles, but it does get through. And then the humid air evacuates over that, and the condensation tends to happen above. And I suppose with these little holes I have here, you know, there is a tiny bit of breeze up there, and it'll evacuate the moisture. That's my approach. I think it works. I've got good overwintering success. Another thing you do to reduce the breeze is you put in your entrance reducer, of course. Got a tiny hole there. That's the only lower entrance we have. All the incoming air usually comes from here in the winter. Even with snow, if it's covered with snow, it still manages to get in. Also prevents mice from getting in. And then you could use a hive wrap. These are very popular. You know, they contain, they're like thick black plastic with bubble wrap inside, or there could be like space blanket type of material inside with foil or whatever. I don't know how well that works. I looked online, you know, the R value of this kind of paper is like 1.5. Okay, I think when we're building houses, we're saying R30 is what we need as a building code or something along those lines. So it's, and just the thickness of wood of the hive is 0.8, R 0.8. So you're not adding a huge insulation value here. I have my doubts about the actual insulation value. It's rather the benefit of these things is cutting the breeze, cutting any you know, incoming breezes. So again, these are my hives here. What I do is I've got my hard insulation down there, and I just throw in some crumpled newspaper again to reduce any sudden movement of air, but not stopping it altogether. And then I put my lid on there, and I think that works for me. You'll see I've got my wrap, and I've taken duct tape, make sure it's well stuck. What am I doing here? It's well stuck to the edges. No wind is coming in from the top. I take a staple gun, I staple it all around down below, you know, so there's no wind coming in. Because whereas during the summer, the bees will use propolis and plug all the cracks in the hive, which is fine. So there are not many cracks in the hive because you have 3 or 4 pieces here. You have the bottom brood chamber, the top brood chamber, you have the inner cover, you have the land, you have the base, and there's spaces between each one. The bees will generally fill that with propolis. But as a beekeeper in September, you're opening your hive for treating them, and you're removing that great seal in September. And by September, it's harder for the bees to plug those holes again, I think. And so this helps compensate for that. And one last piece of equipment I use to try to have still air inside the hive is the slatted rack. It's not necessary, but I like it. You put it here below, we've talked about it earlier, you put the rest of your hive bodies on top. So what you're doing is you're creating another, you know, 4 or 5 centimeters here of dead air space. You have your reduced entrance, very small. The breeze might come in, but it's not going to shuffle around too much. You'll have more dead air space, more insulation. That's the benefit. That's what you want for your hives. Dead air space, they're in there, and there won't be any breezes. Their temperature gradient around the cluster is not disturbed by breezes. And of course, snow is great. Snow is wonderful. If you see this, don't worry about it. The bees will be just fine under that snow cover. Even better, the wind won't bother them, and that's a good sign. Whatever you do, don't pile the snow on with a shovel. That'll be dense snow, and that might stop air circulation. So this guy here, these people here don't have much in terms of protection from the, I guess I saw here, there's some bales of hay, right? So they've put some bales of hay. Any questions here?
Yes, Mark, I have a question.
Yes, Christina.
I don't think you said it earlier, but maybe I missed it. So when you put that wrap on, do you not keep the bottom of it up enough that the entrance reducer is open? Because don't you want air from the bottom to the top?
Of course, that's a good observation. Yes, and this is not a good picture to show that, but if you were down on your knees and looked, you'll see the bottom of the wrap is just at the level of these little ridges here. So there's still a 1 centimeter space between the bottom of the wrap and the hive, the bottom board, and where the entrance reducer is. So they can still move in and out here, the bees. And similarly up here, it's very messy, but I left the upper entrance up here open. So it's important, yeah. Okay. So that is about what you can do to you know, reduce the chances of winter loss. Make sure they're healthy. Make sure they're prepared. They're fed. They got good stores of honey, and make sure that there's no breezes in the winter. But there's one video in the suggested videos at the end of this presentation. It's a guy who lives in Cochrane. Now, if you know where Cochrane is, it's pretty far in northern Ontario. It's the winters are a lot more rigorous there than they are here in Ottawa. And all he wraps with is the equivalent of Tyvek. You know, Tyvek, it's the kind of vapor barrier paper you put on houses before you finish, you put the outside cladding on. It's very thin, you know, it's probably not much thicker than a couple of sheets of newspaper. And he just staples that on tight, no insulation whatsoever. The bee cozies may have R value of 1.5. Tyvek has no R value. It's probably R value of 0 or 0.001. And he's got a lot of hives, and he agrees with me, or I agree with him. It's not about insulation. It's about making sure there's no cracks exposed to breezes in there. And if he does that in northern Ontario, well, I think there's something about that. And I guess I was going to say, as a hobby keeper, as you say, oh, my poor bees are out there, it's -30. And I see pictures of people on the Facebook pages, you know, they're all well-meaning, and, you know, I suppose it doesn't hurt, but, you know, they create monstrous, they'll create a huge, even a lean-to, you know, the roof, and their hives are all covered with hails of bay on all sides, even in the front, and there's you know, fine, okay, do it, no problems. That's a lot of work though, and you might soon give up beekeeping if every autumn you have to spend a day and a half preparing them for winter like that, when I think it's not necessary. Okay, so we'll move on to cleaning. That's the boring part, right? You've had your fun, you've extracted your honey, you've been spending the summer with your bees and the flowers, it's been very pleasant, but now at the end of the season, you're stuck with all this equipment. If you just have one hive in your first year, you'll have maybe one honey super from which you'll extracted honey. You won't have much. But if you got 2 hives, and after the second year, your bees have all built their wax foundation combs, and you realize that they're making more honey. You've got 2, maybe 3 supers for each hive you've had to extract honey from. Now you're going to clean up. It's important to clean up because things get gummed up, and spring comes along, and you know, sometimes you regret not having cleaned up earlier. So here's a picture of a woman who's scraping away. Cleaning is all about scraping and more scraping. You look at these tools. This is a great hive tool. It has a beautiful scraper. Here she seems to have some type of knife. It's a bit messy, but you know, put some music on, have a drink, and have a friend or your spouse with you, and talk about kids and how you're worried about them. And it's a good way to spend a winter evening or afternoon. You'll be removing burr comb and propolis. Burr comb is the comb built where you don't want it to be. So bees will build comb whenever they can in different places. So you clean that up. And propolis, as we mentioned, is the kind of the bee glue, the gummy stuff that they use to plug holes. You want to get all that off. Here's some burr comb right here, right? Very fine and dandy there, but you know, you can't take that back to your extractor. You know, you can't uncap it, extract it. It's a bit of a messy thing. It reminds you a bit of comb honey. You can produce comb honey too. We didn't talk about that. So comb honey is an option for people. When you're selling comb honey, don't forget you're also selling the comb, and the comb is a valuable part because the following year the bees have to rebuild that comb in order to put honey into it. If you want to learn about producing comb honey, there's a lot of resources online. So you can clean these kinds of things as you go over the summer. You know, you open your hive, you see this, you can clean it, you know, take it off. You might see a lot of propolis around here, scrape it a bit. But at the end of the summer, it's good to do a thorough job. So here's a propolis right here, all this gummy stuff. Sometimes it's gummy, sometimes it's crystallized hard like rock candy. Use it to plug holes in cavities, but it's sticky. When you see those videos, the ones you see at the end of the show, the presentation, especially the University of Guelph videos, they open their hives up and there's never a problem. They open a hive up and they pull the frames out, you know, and I do it. Now my frames are all stuck with this propolis. I got to jam it with my hive tool and try to scrape it, pry them open, lift them out. It seems to me that my bees produce a lot of propolis. And some bees do, you know, like every hive has a different personality, and some will be prolific propolis producers. So clean as you go as much as you can. propolis can be I'm starting to look into that. It can be a valuable byproduct in
Yeah, I was wondering.
in the health industry, health, what do you call it, supplements or alternative health or whatever, organic stuff. You go to those shops and ask the person working there, do you have any propolis, whatever. You can go see what's out there and they'll show you how it's sold. And tinctures, pretty easy to make tinctures of this stuff, and it sells for a lot of money. Of course, you don't produce vast quantities. There are ways of encouraging your bees to make more propolis by putting some things in your hive that they want to block. For propolis producers, people who focus on that, they've invented all kinds of innovative ways of encouraging the bees to do that. So that's something to look into as well. So your hive, your smoker gets all gummed up, full of creosote in there as you use it over the summer, burning all kinds of garbage in that thing. You never know what sticks to the insides. And then you get people. These are the real diehard beekeepers. They'll find solutions to all their problems. And this appeared in the latest edition, or one of the recent editions of the Ontario Beekeeper Association magazine. This person built this custom-built contraption where you can put your hive box here, scrape away to your heart's desire, and all the stuff you scrape falls in the hole into a box. And the reason this person has built that, because it gets messy scraping. You're scraping, it goes on the floor, goes on your clothes, and then you have to sweep it up. But if you have a lot of boxes to scrape, yeah, what a great invention. You might find yourself thinking about that. Just because you're looking online for a piece of equipment, you might have a different idea for a different way of doing things. And if you're handy with woodworking and whatnot, beekeeping offers you thousands of opportunities for invention. And finally, the last thing they'll be doing in the winter, I hope, is to learn. So even after 10 years of beekeeping, I think everybody's still a beginner. I'm seeing questions. I'm a beginner. I've got basic questions all the time, and there's a lot of online resources that are very useful for getting the answers. And I see people on the Facebook group there who got 100 hives and they've been doing this for 20 years, and they've got questions, and they go out there among the community and ask, hey, how do you guys do that? I've been having a problem with this. So it's totally normal, and it's the best time in human history. We've been doing this. Humans have been around for what, 100,000 or 200,000 years or something along those lines. If you're look at the archaeology or we've been at least for 20,000 years trying to get honey from bees. But it's only been in the past 10 years out of 200,000 that you have all your resources at your fingertips. You go online and there's so much out there. So, you're born at the right time. You should be thankful. And I do take the time to look at some videos over the winter. So here is some additional resources for this session. Here's one of the best management practices for winter preparation from the Government of Ontario, the Agriculture and Food Ministry. Wrapping hives. This is the guy I told you who just uses Tyvek paper. It's worth watching. He's got a lot of good videos. He's into it. I think he has about 20 or 30 hives, and he's filmed a lot of things. I've been looking at a lot of videos in preparation for this course and trying to find good ones for you folks. And there's a lot of bad videos out there, right? People just don't know how to put a video together, or they try to put music in the background that just totally doesn't work. And some people are good at talking while they're doing it, and they have the right angle. So he's one of them. Here's one on how to install those black bee cozies. A bee cozy is a brand name, but they're different kinds. And it's a slick. It's an advertisement for that brand. I'm not getting any kickbacks here, but it gives you a good idea what it involves. Feeding the bees. University of Guelph also has about 30 or 40 excellent videos. Some that you're too early perhaps for you to look at right now because it's dealing with issues that you don't have to worry about. But again, it's going to keep you busy for several winter nights. Someone asked a question about overwintering hives indoors at the very beginning, and I found this video, and I realized, oh my God, it's complicated. You think it's easy, but it's complicated. You have to worry about too much CO2 in your building. It's got to be completely dark all the time. The temperature's got to be regulated. It's quite a piece of work. But if you're curious about it, it's worth seeing. And then Is it Daniel? He sent me a couple of videos last week in French, and here's one about overwintering in French. It's a producer in somewhere in northern Quebec. He's got quite a number of hives, and he explains to a TV cameraman how he does it. So another good source. So we're coming to the end. We are at the end of our 5 lessons. And I've advertised this class for people who are, or everything you need to know to start beekeeping in the spring 2021 and have a successful first season. So I'm assuming that all of you who signed up were thinking hard about doing that. And I think it's a good time to do it. There's all those resources are out there. When I started, I had nothing. I was digging up in my papers, and I found an old pamphlet from Ministry of Agriculture from 1970 or whatever. I think that's what I had, to start. There was no videos, nothing. But you know what? Beekeeping is easy in that sense. The bees know what they're doing. Just put them there. They know what they're doing. Just don't get in their way too much. Just keep an eye on them. Make sure everything's going okay. So it's not hard. Sue, I scared you last week. I didn't mean to do that. I just, as someone telling you about beekeeping, is my responsibility to kind of highlight all the different issues out there, but they're rare. A lot of those issues are rare. But I don't want you saying, Mark never told me about this. So
you're very, very well informed.
So as noted, this company, when I set up this beekeeping course, I said, hey, how can I encourage people to take my course? They might not want to take my course, So, boy, if I find a company who says they'll give discounts the equivalent of the price of my course, maybe people will want to take my course. If not for my course, at least getting a discount. So I asked one supplier near Ottawa, he didn't want to do it. And then I asked these people, they're like, where are they, Napanee or something like that. And they're pretty big though. And they said, sure, we'd love to, and it's a small discount. So I think the next slide I talk about, they provide this particular, and I'm not getting any kickbacks. So I want you to know, right? I have nothing. I have no interest in you buying from them at all. It's just that these people said they'd give you a little deal. So they give you this deluxe beekeeper's beginner kit. So you'll have the bottom board, good piece of equipment, 2 brood chambers, you have a queen excluder and a medium honey super. And here's one of those deep inner covers. You can see the little upper entrance there. You have a nice lid, an outer cover with a metal roof. You have all the frames. So every one of these boxes has 10 frames because they're not drawn, of course. They give you a hive tool, the smoker, and the gloves, and an outfit, a little beekeeper suit. If anything, this is a nice Halloween costume. But
I got a question for you, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you buy from one supplier and then down the road you buy different, supers from a different supplier, are they all compatible, or are they different sizes and all that stuff?
All standard. It's all standard. I mean, there are the eccentric beekeeper who will have an 8-frame chamber, an 8-frame box here, and you could probably find those somewhere, right? Oh, I buy an 8-frame box, but 98% of the equipment that's sold is the standard stuff, right? So you shouldn't have to worry about that. They don't come assembled. They come flat, right? Let's see. So look at the joints here. They're just, what do you call that? Not quite dovetail, something along those lines. Yeah, cheap. Let's call it
finger jointed.
Oh yeah, you're right. They are finger jointed. I'm a woodworker. I should know that.
What are they called?
They're finger.
Anyway, so you bang them together, you put screws in there, and then you paint them. You have to paint them, because if you don't paint them, they're going to really, over a couple of years, they're going to fall apart, right? But painting really, really helps preserve them for a long time. And then you're all set. So what is it? Their regular price is, let's say, $3.96, and they'll give it to you for, it's actually a $21 discount. I thought it was $25. Oh, well, sorry. And then they'll do free shipping, right? So you can do that. If you buy it locally, I think the local supplier I was talking to, he sells them for $4.30, something like that particular kit. So there's that. So if you want to do this, because I spoke to the woman there. I said, listen, how do we make sure that I'm not sending a million people there? It's just the people taking my course. It's not people who said they took my course. And she just said, "I'll put them in touch with me." So If you want to go ahead and buy equipment from her, the woman I spoke to, send me a note and I'll just write to her, copy you, say, listen, this is Sue. She wants 10 hives, set her up. Okay. And I want to reemphasize again, I don't receive any kickback. So if you want to go and buy somewhere else, that's fine by me. I met a man a couple weeks ago near Casabazua. I don't know if you know where that is, 100 kilometers north of Ottawa. And he had driving a pickup truck with, forget the name of some bee, bee outfit. Hey, so you keep bees, huh? And he was about to set up a beekeeping equipment store in Gatineau just before COVID hit. So those plans are all kiboshed, but he's going to try again next year, he told me. And if that's the case, I think he'd be the only person in urban area Ottawa, for those of you who are around here, I know some of you are not, to get your equipment. Otherwise, the nearest spots really are Carleton Place, and I think over in Quebec side, the Buckingham around there. So, that's kind of far out of the city to get this stuff, but there you go. So with that, whoops, sorry. So additional resources for the winter. I'm not going to go over this. Well, maybe I will. Facebook communities, for those of you who are on Facebook, I find them extremely useful. There's lots of, perhaps airy, fluffy stuff there, but there's a good opportunity to ask questions. You get people having discussions on this way or that way. You might want to consider joining the Ontario Beekeepers Association or les apiculteurs et apicultrices de Québec. I've joined both. The Ontario Beekeeping Manual is a good no-nonsense publication. It's a bit pricey, I think, but it's a bit glossy and it goes over a lot of these things and more. The University of Guelph videos, you can find them here. And I talked about Scott Hendricks in Northern Ontario. That's the link to all his videos. And that's it. So I have a Facebook page too. If you have nothing to do, you can check it out. It's not as if you'll have revelations there. I try to explain what I'm doing sometimes, or I'll add little articles of interest, general interest to beekeepers. At this stage of the game, it's 6 o'clock almost. It's our question period and comments. Oh, I want one last thing. I'm going to be sending you a survey. I just whipped up this afternoon. It's not very professionally done, but asking you basic questions of the course. And I invite your feedback. I invite your criticism, constructive ideally. What I've done well, what I've done poorly. Is it too long? Is it too short? Use of videos, et cetera, et cetera. So, and anything else, feel free to talk to me about the course so that I can improve it. I'm planning on giving some more in the new year. So that would be helpful. Any questions? None. I think you're all.
I have a question.
Yes, Christina.
Actually, a question and a comment. In terms of suppliers, I found Overbrook Honey Company this summer sells equipment in Blackburn.
That's Paul Brennan. And I know him. He's a nice guy from Newfoundland, and but his wife just retired from the civil service, and he's closed shop. He closed shop, selling his stuff good prices in October, I think. And I bought a few things from him. So it's closed. It's gone.
And I thought he was just closing for this winter season. I didn't realize it was.
Well, unless he changed his mind, but I spoke to him in October, and he was closing shop. Yeah.
Oh, so. He was very nice and helpful.
Did you know him? Yeah.
So my question was not specifically related to techniques, but can you comment at all on the idea of bees being non-native, and that by doing beekeeping, we're actually, or are we, do you think we are causing issues for native bees? Yeah.
Well, that's a big issue, and you have to come to terms with that. Each of us have to come to terms of how we feel about that. Yeah, they're non-native. They come here. We brought them over, and you put a hive somewhere, you have 50,000 bees, right? And whereas all of the native bees, they don't have colonies of that size, right? I mean, I think the bumblebees might have 30 or 40 bumblebees or something along those lines. I'm not a bumblebee expert there, but those bumblebees may not always be competing with the honeybees on the same types of flowers, right? But I can't help, in one of my previous jobs, I was very much involved in a big project multi-million-dollar project dealing with eradicating invasive alien species. And so I'm a bit sensitive to this thing. And how do I deal with it? I don't know. How do I deal with it? It's something that's, you know, you can just brush it off. Oh, well, that's life. We've modified our land so much already that, you know, that even if we had no honeybees, the composition of native bee species would be already completely different from what it was before white folks came from Europe. Perhaps some species are favored by that, some are not. I don't know. It's a complex issue, and it's up to you to figure out where you sit there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just hoping that I've had friends bring it up, and I'm beekeeping, so I wish I had an answer. That I thought there might be some science behind it that I could use to fight back.
There was, I have no ready answer for you, but there was on Facebook, sometimes people talk about that, and I'm a bit of a you know, disturber of calm waters in that regard. And I will say, well, you know, honeybees are not native, so, you know, people say we're helping the honeybees or protecting them. Well, they're not native, you know, so it's like protecting chickens, right? You're protecting chickens, that's good, you know. So that's not the right argument. It's not the right argument to use. I think they're saying, well, honey is a staple for humanity for thousands and thousands of years, and we love it, and it's tasty, and you know, so we're continuing with that tradition. It's almost like a tradition that we continue, and we, what can I say?
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to bid you guys good night. The troops are waiting to eat.
Very good, very good. I hope, I'm looking forward to seeing pictures of your bee yard next year.
We'll see what we can come up with.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Mark, you got your plans for your shed yet? You looked into them? It's going to be 20 by 20 now?
Well, I don't want to go too big, but my wife's got enough plans for me already there. So
Okay, good for you.
we got this, like, well, 40-acre section where it's just virgin land, and you know, we have to put in a road and a clearing and get our camper in there and make some four-wheeler trails, and of course we got honeybees in there too, and so we got our work cut out for us there in the spring. So.
As long as you start with honeybees, you're okay.
Oh, that's exactly it, right?
Yeah, well, that's just it. And actually, you know what? On the Beekeepers Association, or not Beekeepers, the Ottawa Beekeepers Community on Facebook. So I just wrote a quick post saying, you know, are there any nukes for sale anywhere, just generally? And a few people got back to me, and I think I've got myself lined up with a gentleman out in Brockville, so it's kind of near where the property is.
Right.
He's also, you know, said, like, you know, he's got another friend in the area where near the property that he helps with beekeeping. So making some local support connections out there. It's awesome.
It's very good. Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
So yeah, I don't know if we're gonna be building a shed. We might just bring the cones back to the garage at home. You know, yeah, there we have access to a hose and more running water, and you know, we could get away from the bugs because they'll probably be, well, I don't know, the bugs aren't too bad in the summer, in the end of the summer.
Well, just make sure that the bees don't get, because you know, the bees will find them in downtown Cumberland. You'll have thousands of honeybees if it's exposed. So make sure your place is
Garage door then.
okay. That's what I was doing until last year. I was bringing my supers from the cottage up near Mont Saint Marie down to Ottawa and doing it in my garage here. You know, that's what I was doing. You know, but last year I finally got a system going where I was able to do it up there.
Yeah, so that worked good for you?
Yeah, it's easy that way, yeah, sure.
That big pot where you do the honey extraction, I guess it's rather large, right? I guess it's kind of awkward to store in your garage.
The extractor? Extractor? Yeah, well, you know, it's, you know, it would probably, the footprint is probably no bigger than the washing machine, and in terms of, you know, so it depends how big your garage is. I guess you can always put it on a pulley and string it up. Ceiling.
I was talking about that tonight during supper though, so let's just put it on a pulley. I got kids, I got bikes, I got everything.
Yeah, I have mine hung up as well like that when I was doing it here, because it does take a lot of room in a garage. Yeah.
You got too many hobbies, so not enough room, right? So yeah, no, we're looking forward to it. And like your course is really great, Mark, and like we really enjoyed it. It gave us something to do on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. It got us away from the kids, and it was interesting at the same time. So
well, yeah, the time is all right. The time 5 to 6 for you guys. I mean, you did. It okay. I mean, what are the options, right? I'm assuming you're working during the daytime, most people at least, and I'm assuming that night you're tired, you've had dinner or whatever, and the kids need attention. I don't know, whatever.
But we get the kids fed, they're eating, they're taking care of the new puppy we have there. So we're in here and we had our supper just as you were starting. That's why our camera's black, and then boom, we put the camera back on. But no, I really enjoyed it, Mark. It was really well structured, and it was really good. It was really good. I think it'll give us the confidence that you're really getting spring.
Well, tell your friends about it, because I'm going to set one up again in probably early January, Yeah,
Yeah,
so.
that's great. That's great. You must have been a school teacher.
I taught for a couple of years, taught science, taught in Calgary.
Yeah, that's great.
Teaching is a great job. Very dynamic.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm going to go, but I want to put in one more plug following up from what I had mentioned at the end of the lesson last week. If you ever feel like doing post-COVID, doing help with hive inspections or something like that, where we could get a learning opportunity, but maybe you could benefit from help from one of us.
Okay.
Post it, email, whatever. I'm on board.
Are you in the Quebec side, Christina, if I remember correctly?
I'm an Ottawa proper.
In your hives?
I only have one, and it's at my house downtown.
You're in downtown Ottawa Hive?
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Honey to all of my neighbors, and everybody's fine so far.
That's great. Well, people like it, and that's good. I'm really glad to see samples of that happening. That's great. Yeah.
And I got great honey.
Parliament Hill honey.
Yeah. I harvested in most of it in July because it was just so prolific. I had so much, and I was trying to keep. I was up to 4 supers, and it's on my front porch. And if I'd gotten any higher, the whole neighborhood would be able to see it. So I had to somehow get the size down. So I harvested honey in July, which was the linden tree honey, and it's fantastic. It's all.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how much honey did you harvest this year from your one hive?
I don't remember the math, but I mean, I had probably 6 supers packed.
Wow. I'm very, very envious and jealous. Maybe I should keep my hive here too.
I did a split too, right? And gave a hive away.
Wow. Well, I've heard that urban beekeeping is great because there's a greater diversity of flowers in the city, and there's always something flowering. If you're in a farming area, it might be certain crops, but they bloom for like 5 days and that's it. And it could be it could be the same kind of crop for miles around. Whereas the city will have many different types of flowers. You have lots of dandelions in the spring and so on. That's amazing. Well, you're kind of tempting me to try it myself. Sneak a hive here. Yeah. Also in Orleans.
You, eh? You actually live in town?
Yeah, I live in town here. Yeah, near Saint Laurent and Saint Laurent Montreal Road. In Paris, I lived in Paris for a few years, and there's a park there, Jardin de Luxembourg. It's a huge park in the middle of the city, and that's where they have the Paris Apiculture Club is there. It's been there for 140 years or something, and they have like 20 hives, and you could walk up to like 3 meters or 2 meters from the hive. The only thing that separates the people who are playing in the park, the kids, the families, and the hives is a shrubbery that is 1 meter tall, and there's a little fence that's another meter tall. That's it. They're so unworried about bees and people there. And that's the example I would use when I'm talking to people about, bees are not dangerous. They're not going to go attack people. And look at this park. It's been there for 150 years. And on a summer day, there's 1 million people in that park, and there are bees all over the place. The bee yard is right there, and there's no problem. So maybe one day the rules will be relaxed for city and urban beekeepers.
In the meantime, we'll just keep going along.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Fantastic.
All right, thanks.
For everybody, yeah. Thank you for everything there, Mark. It was great. Yeah.
Great.
Very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with your future courses. And
We'll see. Yeah. And send me pics of your bee yards.
And I support what Christina mentioned. If you're looking for volunteers, we're more than happy to come help if you want.
I'll send you my kids.
Marc, merci beaucoup.
Okay, Daniel. Bravo.
Thanks Thanks a bunch.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
You are
Yes.
a true enthusiast,
Ah,
and you really made it viral.
wow.
The
Wow.
good viral way. Thank you so
love it.
much.
I love it. Okay, great. Well, folks, have a nice evening and good luck next spring.
Thank you so much.
You have a question? Shoot me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Bye.
Take care.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Thank you.
Yeah.